Their crime was to speak out against those in power and what they consider as injustice. Activists across the Middle East and North Africa are behind bars for peacefully protesting. Their plight is being highlighted by Amnesty International, which says the crackdown on freedom of speech and political opponents increased significantly in 2018, particularly in 3 of the region's most powerful states: Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, which the human rights organization says is now a more dangerous place for critics than at any time in the past.
These 3 countries are emblematic of the general situation of human rights across the region. So in Iran, this past year alone, over 7,000 people were put in prison just for participating in protest. In Egypt, you have over 100 people who were put in prison only for expressing their opinions. In Saudi Arabia, activists, women activists who've been campaigning for women's rights have been put in jail since May 2018 and tortured and subject to sexual harassment and are still arbitrarily detained.
The list goes on. Researchers have documented abuses in the United Arab Emirates, Algeria, Bahrain, Yemen, Syria, Libya, Lebanon.
Amnesty International believes the lack of accountability and the lack of international pressure is what encourages governments in the Middle East and North Africa to continue committing human rights violations. There is no fear of punishment. Accountability, it says, is essential, not just to ensure justice for the victims, but to prevent further violations.
One of those victims, Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was killed inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul last year. Amnesty International calls it a cold-blooded murder and an example of global inaction to ensure those responsible are brought to justice.
The reason the Jamal Khashoggi case is so incredibly important for us at Amnesty International is that finally it brought some scrutiny to Saudi Arabia's human rights record, and finally a number of Western states started making the responsible decisions with regards to their weapons sales to Saudi Arabia.
But countries like the US, the UK, and France are being asked to do the same. Amnesty International is not just criticizing what it calls authoritarian regimes for cracking down on any form of dissent. It is blaming Western governments who have been and are willing to look the other way when their interests are at stake. Zeina, Khodr, Aljazeera, Beirut.